you're still doing the same kind of matching behind the scenes, which is something that consumers have again and again said, we don't like that. We want transparency and we want to have some control over what's happening with our data. There isn't any need for consent here because we're putting consumers in control. You want to be upfront with them. You want to be very clear. Like, we're running a business that provides a service or product that you like, and you're either paying us in money or we're running ads, right?
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. So first-party data is supposed to be the new gold. It feeds retail media. It is a key piece in data clean rooms, customer data platforms, CDP, or even newer versions of the data management platform, DMP. As a result, everybody is collecting email addresses wherever you go. In the media space, collecting everyone's email address has become the answer to addressability and measurement challenges, but translating it into a hashed ID like Unified ID and others that replaces cookies once they're finally deprecated results in a higher risk and a worse privacy challenge than using cookies themselves, given that we're talking about real direct identifiers. If you combine this with the fact that people have become tired of being asked to sign up for whichever program or benefits wherever they go, every website, every coffee shop, resulting in a decreasing number of people who actually share a real address, we have a major problem. Publishers still need to make a living, and the market demands an ability to filter audiences and provide relevance. We have already discussed the limits of contextual advertising with Mattia Fossi recently, and I've written about it. So media owners need to understand consumer preferences in a way that respects privacy. In this context, we have bumped into Adam Klee. Adam Klee has an impressive track record in the ad tech world, having worked at Disney, Google, NBC, Twitter, Polar, or Spotify. There's a sort of common thread in his career, which is driving better yield for publishers. But he's also thought long and hard about his experience as a consumer who he strongly believes in privacy by default. Hoping to combine the two, so fitting very nicely in the Masters of Privacy sweet spot, so to speak, he is the founder of Licorice, a platform that, in his own words, gives consumers the privacy they want and publishers the data they need. We'll talk about a very appealing formula, at least to me, to avoid consent as a legal basis now that we have mostly accepted that consent management platforms or consent banners have destroyed the world and brought zero benefits. We'll also talk about why email-based identity solutions are flawed. And we will explore Licorice's own research regarding why people use ad blockers and what they expect in terms of ads, relevance, privacy, convenience, or control. Let's get started. Adam, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Sergio.
It's a pleasure. You are jumping on a problem that many of us have tried to resolve in the past years, months, and I do believe you've got a novel angle and a novel approach to it. You have been doing your research and asking around and trying to understand what it is that first, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Maybe in your own words, that will help.
I think the better way to go about answering that actually is starting with the problem we were originally trying to solve a couple of years ago. And that grew out of an understanding we had in our prior, my co-founder and I had in our prior work, which told us users aren't giving valid or matchable email addresses, even to trusted publishers. And we had been looking at that because more and more users were either blocking their device IDs and cookies, and people were saying, "Well, this is the solution. This is the alternative." And what became clear to us is that it's probably not the solution or the alternative because, again, people weren't giving accurate emails. But the other part of it is that we said, well, you're also not really addressing the core problem. Why are consumers blocking mobile device IDs or cookies? And certainly some people will argue that, well, that's just a function of Apple and now Google saying we're going to block them and we want to honor consumer privacy. But it's important to remember that the reason that Apple and Google are doing that is because consumers are demanding it. And it's the same reason governments are responding to it as well. And so our feeling was email was, first of all, not going to be reliable. Again, less than half of the users we had seen in our prior work were giving accurate or reliable matchable email addresses. But the other is that you're still doing the same kind of matching behind the scenes, which is something that consumers have again and again said, we don't like that. We want transparency and we want to have some control over what's happening with our data. So we just stepped back and said, what's a better solution, or what's an alternative to address these consumers' needs? And for us, that was really about let's give consumers control over the data that they want to have used against them or used for them for marketing purposes. And then let's make sure that publishers have access to it. So the idea was we'll address the consumer need and we'll address the publisher need.
So, with that in mind, you are tackling the first sort of direct relationship between the publisher and the audience. But there's people sitting behind the publisher, and we have all seen the publisher, in fact, sort of reluctantly getting pushed into gathering consent, then gathering emails. But in the end, there's an advertiser paying for this. How do you address that? What happens behind the publisher until it reaches the actual, the paying
Uh-huh.
side?
Um, well, I think I picked up two parts of that question. One is a little bit of like the mechanism and consent mechanism that the publishers in the entire industry have been either pushed into or are pursuing, and also ultimately, what's the way to make sure that it's working for marketers, publishers, and consumers. I think on the first part, our approach has been I think when we started trying to ask how we could solve the problem, we said, how do we really make sure that consumer trust is placed at the forefront? And I think for us, one of the things we were comparing ourselves next to is ad blocking on one extreme. So we said that's a consumer saying, I don't want any of this. It's important for people to realize that, okay, page load was still the number one reason people ad block, but the number two and three reasons, I forgot exactly which order, but they're right next to each other, is irrelevant ads. Consumers don't like irrelevant ads, and data tracking or having their data tracked everywhere. And so our feeling there was, how can we do this without any kind of like data tracking or sharing of data? And we said, can we do it in a way that will work for marketers and publishers? Is like you said, if it doesn't, like, I I recognize the right of consumers to say I want to block ads, but it's something that if you've of course been in the publishing industry, especially, gets your blood boiling. And so the idea was, how can we reach that type of consumer, especially the ones who care more about their data, and and do it in a way that works for them, gives them some control, enables them to get relevant ads, and our own research also reaffirms the importance of making sure that consumers can maintain relevant ads, uh, and make sure that publishers can get a data signal they can use to enable marketers to target.
Yeah.
And so that's really the approach we took there. And so we said, you know what? After going through that, we're like, there isn't any need for consent here because we're putting consumers in control. And um, we so And we then made sure that not just giving them control, but that there weren't things like even IP address being tracked and sent in bid streams and stuff like that. So we don't log IP address. Of course, the publisher could see the user's IP, but we don't send it along. We're purposely taking steps we can to make sure that there isn't behind the scenes tracking that would go against consumers' interests. And for that reason, I'll say to people, like, we don't care about consent. Of course we do, and we need to make sure we're not doing something. But for the most part, if you don't collect any kind of PII or personal information, you can largely avoid that question. Um, and we would say the same thing to a publisher too. Like, doesn't matter what your user said in terms of consent or not, we have a solution that they have opted into already and that they actually prefer because it gives them control and anonymity and all that.
People are tired of the way consent management platforms have approached control, choice, transparency. So if you can get rid of that, which is something that we seem to have used to simply check that checkbox and move on, that is actually, it seems like the right step towards control.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely times where when we had come up with the original idea and everything, we're like, is it really this simple? Like, and both again as consumers and um, people who want to see publisher business to succeed. And some of it is that simple. I think that one of the key things, though, is, and probably the reason other people hadn't taken this approach yet, is I do think people probably um, there's a little too much, I think, of a bet on, well, if it's not super fast for the consumer, or you make things a little too, you create too much friction, they're never going to do it. And I didn't believe that as a consumer myself. I'm like, I'm willing to do certain things, like, and then you start to ask, look around the industry too, and you realize, look, people go through the friction of installing a VPN. So again, that's not just to like get access to content in other countries. People do that to maintain more privacy. Um, People go to the extent of finding burner emails and things like this. I meet people who even update their Google account settings, which is similar, like saying, like, what are my preferences and things like this. So, and people might say, well, that's still only a small fraction. It's not really. And I think, again, if you make it easy enough, most people want relevant ads and most people want some level of default anonymity. And so that those two factors, I think, alone have paved the way to say, yeah, this is something that can really work for consumers, and they're happy to invest a little bit of time in order to enable it. As the alternatives, again, have either been put in an ad blocker, and that's not great too, because they know it's not helping publishers, and of course publishers say, we won't let you come in if you are using one, and things like that. But it's not creating a real opportunity for consumers and publishers and ultimately marketers to kind of connect and get on the same page and say, this is what I would like, and please give me some controls around it. And so that's really been our approach, is just saying, why don't we do something that works for consumers, does require them to do a little bit of work and everything, but engage with them in a one-to-one dialogue. And so far consumers are responding really positively. And our hope certainly is that whatever percentage of users it is, it's becomes a really meaningful audience for publishers, where they can say, okay, I've got 20, maybe 30, maybe 40 or more percent of their users who are the ones who feel more strongly about having privacy by default, and they're happy to use a solution like ours, and we can give publishers meaningful data. And we honestly think our data could be the most valuable data publishers get access to, because users are raising their hand and saying, yes, these are the things I'm interested in.
So there's a sort of ethical element on the consumer side. We normally don't touch on that because we talk about what happens, as publishers, as advertisers. We want to respect privacy. We want to sort of make sure that it is compatible with convenience and speed, as you say. But on the consumer side, as readers, as part of the audience, if you use an ad blocker, there's always been that ethical implication. Like, journalism is there for a reason. They need to make a living. I've tried to make that case in the past, to consumers in the publishing space, and I've been quite frustrated. I guess I never found the right formula. But It's surprising the amount of people that use ad blockers and how hard it is for them to listen when you show them an alternative where they will have ads and privacy at the same time. It's very hard to communicate. It's very hard to get a message across. But in your perception, do you see like a percentage of people that will always take advantage, or do you think that most people by default, if properly explained, they will hope to sustain, they will hope to help people make a living out of journalism and news and
Yeah.
content?
I definitely believe that when you lay things out for the average consumer, it's not even with the publisher value prop. I mean, it could be lots of things, including marketers. Like marketers say, there's all sorts of things that happen when you go to a retail site today to either maybe collect an email address or a phone number or something like that. And there's been plenty of research about this too. But if you're just very clear with the consumer what it's for and how you're using it, you're going to be more likely to get it than just simply saying 20% off. And when if you say 20% off, you're probably more likely to get the burner email or the fake or the backup email or something like that. And I would argue too, and again, there's also research out there about this, but you're building a relationship with this user, whether you're a brand in the end or you're a publisher who's providing content, and you want to be upfront with them. You want to be very clear. Like we're running a business that provides a service or product that you like, and you're either paying us in money or we're running ads, right? And so just being very clear. And I do think the average consumer is just not given enough credit for being thoughtful and understanding that, yes, I do want to support this business, and I realize that this is important. And I think, unfortunately, too, they're just it's easy for people to think that the most extreme ad blocker is the average consumer or something like that. I will say, in our own research, we we've spoken to a lot of users, and the I don't know what percentage it is exactly. It's like 5 to 10% of users are, I would say, angry. And there's where there's like a feeling like there's just a default lack of trust. It doesn't matter what you seem to be offering. I'm not saying it's
And they're taking revenge on the system.
something like that, or yeah, it's like they're angry about something. And so I think you're always going to have some percentage of people that will be hard to reach. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be up for that challenge, honestly, but I think though the vast majority of people are all in play in terms of saying, would you be willing to provide a little bit of data that's not personal, in exchange for really helping support the publishers whose content you really like?
Have you found do you have any other insights that you can share in terms of what you believe the market is ready or is willing to do on the consumer
Hmm.
side?
um, I think the a couple things I would say here. One is actually about consent, both in the U.S., but I think more so in Europe, just because it's a requirement there, um, currently, whereas in the U.S., in most cases, it's sort of a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
But the and I'll mention that point first, I guess, which is ultimately all of these things. As a consumer, putting on my consumer hat, I don't feel like they're very transparent about what exactly is happening. There are certain people, at least in the US, who have advocated and said it should really be the statements should be about purposes that I'm collecting email address so that I can do A, B, C, and D. And they should be organized in a way where it's clear to the consumer. Like A is, I want to send you offers. Okay. As a consumer, I'd say great. Or newsletters if you're a publisher. Okay, great. That's exactly what I was expecting and wanted. B might be, I want to, maybe there aren't going to come up with four options right now, but let's say B is the one where I want to share this with other people that you shared your email address with. and we'll allow each other to note that you're a customer of us both. You'll probably have some customers say, okay, all right, I guess. Maybe if you listed out the publishers or companies, of course that's going to be difficult. But the point is, some people will probably say yes to that. Well, a lot probably won't. And you can go down the line, whatever the other ones are. But the point is, A is an easy one. It's still a privacy by default treatment, essentially, of saying, we'll give us some data and we'll just keep it to ourselves and use it between us. Great. Once you get into the other ones, though, of the sharing with others, that's where it's, again, you're going to have differences of opinion there. The point is, though, most consent today, with very few exceptions, actually makes any of that clear and just gives you those easy choices. And the lack of consistency, I think, is the other real really real problem there. And so I don't mean to beat up on GDPR implementations and everything. And of course, everyone's, I don't want to say stuck, but they're in the same boat with trying to comply and still run their businesses. But I would argue that I don't think it's actually been a benefit for the consumer. And you're, of course, creating this friction. And it's probably been bad for relationships with consumers in some ways too, because it's like, wait, what's happening here? Why do I get these? They're really annoying. It's a lot of legalese. And so, personally, I would love to see people move in a direction to make it a little more consumer friendly, have a little more confidence that consumers will opt into certain things, and that frankly, if they wouldn't opt into things, well, that tells you that's a really valuable, important signal. This is somebody who says, I'm not good with this. The other point I did want to make, though, too, and I think this is something that in the US is also being overlooked, I would argue, with the push to try to get emails or phone numbers or things like that, is that by continuing to do something, let's say behind the scenes, or that's not completely transparent to a consumer, you run the risk of that consumer, first of all, harming trust with that consumer, which isn't good for your business if a consumer doesn't trust you. But the more practical thing is similar to third-party cookie deprecation. So third-party cookies, including from vendors who provided a really valuable service to publishers, let's say in some cases analytics or things like that for brands, have been thrown in with the group that are doing a lot of data tracking. And so you've lost some of the real benefits from some of these tools simply because they were all lumped together. And what I'm getting at is with email address, when you start teaching people like, oh, I don't want to give up my email address, you're going to lose the primary communication tool that a company has today with consumers, or at least a one-to-one communication tool. That's pretty significant. And maybe some would say, well, they're already giving me fake email addresses anyway. So the ones who are giving me the real, I still have that or something. My line there is email wasn't meant to be an ID. And so if you want to create an actual replacement, create another ID, and maybe the industry can agree on, what that standard should be and how it should work and everything else. But I think it ultimately has to be something that the consumer opts into. For what it's worth, it's essentially what we've ended up creating. But I think there's an opportunity for there to be some standardization and all that. And again, put consumers in control, and maybe you really can have that nirvana of like marketers being able to get really meaningful signal and protect consumer privacy at the same time. So the benefit is there's still a single ID that allows the marketers to frequency cap appropriately wherever this user is logging in, and it allows for one-to-one attribution as well. And so to us, that really, you look at that and it's like, oh, this does make a lot of sense. Who doesn't want to have some one-to-one ability to market? And if you just ensure some level of anonymity on a technical level, and we're very careful about making sure people know what anonymity is and isn't. But the idea is, generally speaking, you're just a consumer in the wild who shares a little bit of information about yourself, and with that limited bit of information, you can actually, people are fine with saying, yeah, I don't care that that I saw your ads already on this other site, and therefore you can frequency cap, or that there's a view through conversion. I saw your ad here, and then I ended up going to your brand site later on and purchasing something.
Okay, so from Licorice, from your platform's perspective now, call it by name. So you are solving two challenges. One of them is in terms of how you communicate to consumers the value, the benefit. You are working on explaining what anonymity, the difference between what's happening now, cookies, what would happen with email based IDs, and what happens with your platform. That's one effort. And then, if I understand well, there's a second part which I think is very appealing, which is that you are ensuring consistency as well in the manner, or I want to know about how you do that, right? Or how you could get to greater consistency in the manner in which people are then controlling in the same way their data across the board. For example, if I am, within a publisher's web, if I am at a publisher's website and I am offered the opportunity for that publisher to deduplicate me with an advertiser, and I am given the name for that advertiser, and it's just an ID, right? There's no name, there's no email address, there's no phone number. But I do agree that this advertiser, as it happens today, for example, in retail media, right? Retail media has this very strong case these days that in the end, it is all about second party data, right? So if I understand well, most of the scenarios are about, again, finding, you know, common customers or readers on one side or customers on the other, and so on. So if I agree to that, then I know how to do it for every publisher and I know exactly what's going to happen. So, two challenges to summarize that, and both are sort of communication or UX challenges. One of them is I need to know that as a consumer, what you offer is better in terms of anonymity or privacy. And the second is I need to better understand what's happening down the line because I do not understand what happens today with a
Yeah.
CMP. How do you see those two?
So I agree with you. Those are important challenges. That was the biggest um, part of our first year of development was actually the consumer experience and how they respond to things. And I'm not saying like we feel really good about where it is relative to where it was when we started, but we think that there's certainly we do ongoing testing and getting feedback from users and everything like that. Um, but the main thing is when you go into the consumer with an approach of no name, no email, no phone, that alone gets their attention, um, just because they're not used to that. We have people go through um, our product and literally say to us like, I know you're going to ask me for my email later on. Like I just know it. Like you claiming this, but it's just not possible. Like the incredulousness is definitely something that is fairly common in some of the user testing, where they don't even understand how it works in a way. Like how can you have an account where you don't have my personal information? And so I'm again not saying we're perfect there, but we feel good about the way consumers respond to that initial offering, that they get that this is actually different. And some of them still don't believe, or it's going to take a little more, um, probably, to convince them that we're really not trying to track you or get your personal data. um, and we do different things in the product to just try to reiterate that, and we have FAQs and we try to be very transparent. We're really trying to do things in a way we would want if we were consumers. If you look at our terms and conditions, they're still fairly long and really technical in lots of places, but we try to do things that we've seen other companies do where they put things in plain English. We explain like what is a privacy policy anyway is included in there. Like the average consumer doesn't know what that is, or why it's required. So that's just the approach we're taking, and we think so far that's helping. But we have a lot we can do there. As far as I want to make sure I'm answering this part of the question correctly, but uh, if you mean like, ultimately knowing that they have an ID that's seen by all of the publishers and places they log into, we don't get into necessarily that level of detail. But the main thing is if you're a consumer and nobody has any personal information on you, it would have been like going to an American shopping mall in the 1980s, like you go into 25 different stores and, in some of them, maybe you purchase things and you were browsing and doing whatever, but like nobody knows who you are. The Orange Julius people, to use an American one, didn't tell the Macy's people that, what you just bought there, and that, maybe be more likely to be interested in some other kind of product or something like that. Like it's just not happening. You can just kind of go around and mind your own business and enjoy yourself and shop and whatever else. So our feeling is, you know, maybe that's not the best analogy, but I don't mind it. Like I kind of like the idea of being able to just go about your business and not have to really worry about it. Um, that so that's that holds up even if you have allowed Macy's and Orange Julius and whatever take to also have your ID in addition to the publishers, whose sites you visited. And again, you're in control of that as a consumer. I mean, we can see a future where, as a consumer, you might come into our interface and see all the brands you really love, and you know maybe that's a way they're even communicating with you or something like that. But at the very least, it's something like, oh yeah, I've defined these brands or ones I follow or really like, and good things can happen, and people just generally feel more comfortable, and there's just more trust in general between consumers and companies.
Do I get to carry my preferences over to another publisher? We've spoken to some people that are doing this with local storage in the browser, getting closer to the topics API idea in the sense that it's federated, that it stays on the client side. But there's other people trying to do it on the blockchain, people trying to build a little wallet with preferences and different degrees of complexity. How do you address that to keep it simple or not?
Yeah, it's actually it's pretty simple. We enable users to create an account, and then they use that account to sign on to publishers or within apps, and ultimately even within brand sites and everything else. So it's a single sign on, and in that, once that connection is made and the consumer has said, I'm signing in with Licorice, and they know the sole point of Licorice is to have an account where your data is shared with others in exchange for anonymity. um they know what's happening there. It's not, I'm not uh throwing other SSO providers or accounts under the bus, but a lot of those cases, those are large companies who already have a lot of data on you, and they're using it to enrich their own data and things like that. We exist for one sole purpose, which is to give consumers an account that they're in control of, and they get to decide what they want, who they want to share that data with. And
I understand based on your study, and I believe all of us appreciate relevance if it doesn't get creepy, right? And I understand there's also a bit of a value proposition in there, right? Real relevance.
yeah, there's a lot of research out there on consumers generally preferring more relevant ads. And I think, as I mentioned, it's actually the number three reason people ad block is irrelevant ads. One little anecdote there is, we've tried to limit the data we collect to just what is essential for marketing ultimately. And so we said, you know what, we're not going to collect gender, we're not going to collect age. We're going to ask people what they're interested in. And after some user testing, we started getting feedback from consumers that they actually wanted to give us their age because they didn't like being marketed to as if they were a millennial, if they were older, or vice versa. And so we introduced it. It's purely optional. People do not have to give their age, but about 2/3 of them do. And that's just, again, a case where people do prefer relevant ads. I'll give you one other anecdote, which is a little I'm also someone, maybe not a surprise, who tends not to want to give out too much personal information when I'm online. And so I tended to default to giving a particular birth date. And it made me like 80 years old or something. I don't remember. And I was doing that for a while in like the early 2000s or something. And then I started getting ads for like geriatric products and realizing, okay, I really don't like seeing these ads. And so I changed it to something that was closer to my real age, but still not my real age. So that's just a case too where, all right, I'll give you some information. It's still not, a detailed bit of information about me, but it'll enable me to get more relevant ads.
Where do you think we're going, and how do you position yourselves to reach that future?
Yeah. So I think that's the general trend is consumer empowerment, and people should be comfortable with it and have confidence that consumers are actually going to pick things that are going to work for everyone's businesses as well.
Thank you very much.
All right, Sergio, I appreciate it. It was great to catch up.
Okay, that's all for today. And you will find some episode notes and links to our social channels on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.